Introduction to the nervous system. The picture you have in your mind of the nervous system probably includes the brain, the nervous tissue contained within the cranium, and the spinal cord, the extension of nervous tissue within the vertebral column. That suggests it is made of 2 organs, and you may not even think of the spinal cord as an organ. But the nervous system is a very complex structure. Within the brain, many different and separate regions are responsible for many different and separate functions. It is as if the nervous system is composed of many organs that all look similar and can only be differentiated using tools such as microscope or electrophysiology. The central and peripheral nervous systems. The nervous system can be divided into 2 major regions: the central and peripheral nervous systems. The central nervous system, or CNS, is the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, or PNS, is everything else. The brain is contained within the cranial cavity of the skull, and the spinal cord is contained within the vertebral cavity of the vertebral column. It is a bit of an oversimplification to say that the CNS is what is inside these 2 cavities, and the peripheral nervous system is outside of them. But that is one way to start to think about it. In actuality, there are some elements of the peripheral nervous system that are within the cranial or vertebral cavities. The peripheral nervous system is so named because it is on the periphery, meaning beyond the brain and spinal cord. Depending on different aspects of the nervous system, the dividing line between central and peripheral is not necessarily universal. Nervous tissue presents in both CNS and PNS, contains 2 basic types of cells, neurons and glial cells. Neurons are the primary type of cell that most anyone associates with the nervous system. They are responsible for the computation and communication that the nervous system provides. They are electrically active and release chemical signals to target cells. Glial cells, or glia, are known to. The brain has over 100 billion neurons. They play a supporting role for nervous tissue. Ongoing research pursues an expanded role that glial cells might play in signaling. But neurons are still considered the basis of this function. Neurons are important, but without glial support, they would not be able to perform their function. A glial cell is one of a variety of cells that provide a framework of tissue that supports the neurons and their activities. The neuron is the more functionally important of the 2 in terms of the communicative function of the nervous system. To describe the functional divisions of the nervous system, it is important to understand the structure of a neuron. Neurons are cells and therefore have a soma, or cell body, but they also have extensions of the cell. Each extension is generally referred to as a process. There is one important process that every neuron has called an axon, which is the fiber that connects a neuron with its target. Another type of process that branches off from the soma is the dendrite. Dendrites are responsible for receiving most of the input from other neurons. Looking at nervous tissue, there are regions that predominantly contain cell bodies and regions that are largely composed of just axons. These 2 regions within nervous system structures are often referred to as gray matter. the regions with many cell bodies and dendrites, or white matter, the regions with many axons. Demonstrates the appearance of these regions in the brain and spinal cord. The colors ascribed to these regions are what would be seen in fresh or unstained nervous tissue. Gray matter is not necessarily gray. It can be pinkish because of blood content or even slightly tan, depending on how long the tissue has been preserved. White matter is white because axons are insulated by a lipid-rich substance called myelin. Lipids can appear as white or fatty material, much like the fat on a raw piece of chicken or beef. Actually, gray matter may have that color ascribed to it because next to the white matter, it is just darker, hence gray. The distinction between gray matter and white matter is most often applied to central nervous tissue, which has large regions that can be seen with the unaided eye. When looking at peripheral structures, often a microscope is used and the tissue is stained with artificial colors. That is not to say that central nervous tissue cannot be stained and viewed under a microscope. It is unstained tissue is mostly likely from the CNS, for example, a frontal section of the brain or a cross-section of the spinal cord. The adult brain. The adult brain is separated into 4 major regions: the cerebrum, the diencephalon, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. The cerebrum is the largest portion and contains the cerebral cortex and subcortical nuclei. It is divided into 2 halves by the longitudinal fissure. The cerebrum, the iconic gray mantle of the human brain, which appears to make up most of the mass of the brain, is the cerebrum. The wrinkled portion is the cerebral cortex, and the rest of the structure is beneath that outer covering. There is a large separation between the 2 sides of the cerebrum called the longitudinal fissure. It separates the cerebrum into 2 distinct halves, a right and left cerebral hemisphere. Deep within the cerebrum, the white matter of the corpus callosum provides the major pathway for communication between the 2 hemispheres of the cerebral cortex. The brain is about 75% water and is the fattest organ in the body. Many of the higher neurological functions, such as memory, emotion, and consciousness, are the result of cerebral function. The complexity of the cerebrum is different across vertebrate species. The cerebrum of the most primitive vertebrates is not much more than the connection for the sense of smell. In mammals, the cerebrum comprises the outer gray matter, that is, the cortex, from the Latin word meaning bark of a tree, and several deep nuclei that belong to 3 important functional groups. The basal nuclei are responsible for cognitive processing, the most important function being that associated with planning movements. The basal forebrain contains nuclei that are important for learning and memory. The limbic cortex is the region of the cerebral cortex, that part of the limbic system, a collection of structures involved in emotion, memory, and behavior. Cerebral cortex. Many of the higher neurological functions, such as memory, emotion, and consciousness, are the result of cerebral function. The complexity of the cerebrum is different across vertebrate species.